The story I'm going to talk about today will completely baffle you. A newlywed goes sightseeing in a new town while her husband attends a conference nearby. However, nothing that happens after that makes any sense at all. Let's talk about Judy Smith. Judy Bradford Smith was a 50-year-old home health nurse hailing from Newton, Massachusetts, a suburb of Boston. She had been divorced twice. Her first marriage ended quickly when her husband fled to Sweden to avoid the Vietnam War. Her second marriage didn't last long either, and it ended after having 2 children, a son Craig and a daughter Amy. While caring for an elderly patient who just had surgery, Judy met the patient's son, a man named Jeffrey Smith. The two hit it off quickly, and both, with divorces in their past, didn't want to rush into anything, so after 10 years of dating, they were married in September of 1996. Just 5 months after their marriage, the couple was to make a trip to Philadelphia. Jeffrey was an attorney, and he was due to be a speaker at the Northeast Pharmaceutical Conference at the DoubleTree Hotel in Philadelphia. After the conference was over, the couple was then to travel to New Jersey to visit with some friends. Judy Smith loved to travel, and this would be her first time in the city, and she had planned to visit some of the historical sites as well as do some shopping. The couple arrived at Logan Airport in Boston on April 9, 1997, to board their plane to Philadelphia. Judy was upset to realize that she had forgotten her driver's license at home and knew she wouldn't be allowed to board the flight. She apologized to her husband for the mistake and told him she would return home to retrieve it and take another flight, and she would arrive later that night. Jeffrey had to speak at the conference later that day, so he would have to board the original flight. By Jeffrey's account, Judy did arrive at the hotel that evening and even brought him flowers as an apology. The couple spent the evening in their room and had room service delivered. The next day was to be a full day for both of them. The morning of April 10, 1997 would start out rather typical. Jeffrey Smith had gotten up before his wife and went downstairs to breakfast at the DoubleTree. When he came back to the hotel room to recommend the breakfast to his wife, Judy was in the shower. After briefly chatting with his wife, he left to go downstairs as the conference would begin soon. Judy was to meet him back at the hotel around 5 p.m. that night to get ready for a cocktail party that would begin at 6 p.m. at the hotel. He would tell his wife goodbye, but he had no idea it would be the last time he would ever speak to her. Jeffrey spent the day at the conference. Exactly what Judy did that day is uncertain. Jeffrey arrived back to the hotel room around 5 p.m. that night, expecting to find his wife. Judy hadn't arrived. Jeffrey would go to the cocktail party and continue to go up to the couple's hotel room, thinking his wife would arrive at any time. The later the time got, the more worried Jeffrey became. At first, he thought Judy may have been confused at the time they were supposed to meet up. Finally, Jeffrey was panicked at what could have happened to his wife. He knew that Judy had planned to take a Flash tour bus around the town that day. To clarify, Flash is a public transit service in Philadelphia that connects visitors to the city's popular attractions. He hired a cab to slowly take him on the route the tour bus would have taken, all the while seeing if he could catch a glimpse of his wife. He also went to the police station that night to report her missing. According to him, they were dismissive and told them it was too soon to report the disappearance. They told him if he came back later the next day, he would probably be allowed to file the report. Jeffrey Smith did take a look around the hotel room to see if there were any clues. He did notice the only outfit that appeared to be missing was the one that Judy had worn the day before. However, Judy's children said it was likely that their mother would have worn the same outfit twice. Judy appears to have been spotted around Philadelphia. Sometimes the sightings of her were of a woman acting disoriented. This, however, is confusing because there was a homeless woman in the Penn Landing area of the city who resembled Judy very closely. In fact, a few days later, when Judy's son Craig caught a glimpse of the woman from across the street, he actually thought it was his mother. So it's difficult to know how many, if any, of the sightings were actually Judy. Jeffrey did everything he could think of to find his wife. He contacted her children to see if they had heard from her. They had not. He called his daughter and asked her to go to the couple's house and see if there was perhaps a message from Judy on their answering machine. There was not. According to reports, the Philadelphia mayor Ed Rendell and Pennsylvania House Rep John Purcell were both in attendance at the conference. When they heard Jeffrey Smith's wife had disappeared, they got the wheels in motion. According to Jeffrey Smith, the police were very cooperative now and took a report. Shortly after she went missing, Judy's 2 children would travel to Philadelphia, and there was an extensive search for their mother. They would travel to homeless shelters, the morgue, hospitals, anywhere they could think of. They even rented bicycles so they could quickly travel the city and chase down leads. I will add that Judy had a trademark red backpack that she carried everywhere with her in lieu of a purse. Some of the possible sightings of Judy did mention the red backpack. There was a homeless man named David who was convinced that he had seen Judy Smith and said she had even slept on a park bench next to him. He knew of the homeless woman Judy kept getting mistaken for, and he insisted it was not her. The family of Judy Smith even went back to interview David again on April 15th, and he told them they had just missed her. The family frantically searched for her in an area but came up empty. This sighting was credible to Jeffrey Smith, as he said it was the last person to ID Judy by viewing an actual photo of her. It did appear that Judy did take a trip on the Flash bus the day that she was to travel on it. A hotel employee at the DoubleTree said Judy asked them where she could catch the bus. A bus driver said he picked her up at Front and South Streets and let her off near the hotel around 3 p.m. She was also reportedly seen leaving the Greyhound bus terminal, but the family seems to think she was probably just there to use their restroom. It seems that the first sightings of Judy possibly acting disoriented started the day after she went missing. By then, Judy had inexplicably made her way to New Jersey. The sighting of Judy that seemed to be credible occurred at the Macy's Deptford Mall in Deptford, New Jersey, across the Delaware River. Deptford was only about 22 miles from Philadelphia, and the New Jersey Transit bus route does make hourly trips from near where her hotel was to the town. It wasn't hard to see how Judy made her way there. The bigger question is why. The reports of her at the mall seem to report Judy was a little off, but some of the things she was heard to say were true. She said she was looking for clothes for her daughter, but that her daughter rarely liked any clothes she picked out for her. Judy's daughter Amy said this was definitely true. It was also reported that Judy tried to get a young girl to leave with her. The thought is that Judy was confused and thought the girl was her daughter. The people who believe they saw Judy in New Jersey also reported the confused woman was carrying a red backpack. The sightings eventually dried up of Judy around the Philadelphia area. After a few weeks in town searching for their loved one, Judy's husband and children did finally return home. Jeffrey was still working on finding his wife. He had hired a PI and had hundreds of posters made and distributed around the area. His wife's disappearance had definitely taken a toll. He scaled back a large amount of his law practice. The reason why was that a good portion of it was criminal defense work, and in his words, "And now that I feel that I'm a victim, I couldn't in good conscience continue to represent criminal defendants." Jeffrey Smith also had a problem with how law enforcement was handling his wife's case. He said he was irate as he was told that right after his wife was reported missing, her name and description was reported in the NCIC, National Crime Info Center. Weeks after, he found out she wasn't listed initially, therefore any people discovered in April and entered in the database would not be a match. It was also reported that Jeffrey Smith refused to take a polygraph. He denies that adamantly. He said he would take one on the condition that the FBI administer it, and when he passed it, the Philadelphia PD would formally request the FBI to assist in his wife's case. The police claim that Jeffrey, being an attorney, would know the FBI would not get involved in the case, so his conditions were the same as a refusal in their opinion. The police also seemed to never completely clear Jeffrey as a suspect, even though the time his wife went missing, he was at the conference with dozens of people to verify that. They were all so curious if Judy ever actually made it to Philadelphia that night. A few people said they saw her, but police said these people didn't personally know Judy. No one on the later flight necessarily remembered seeing Judy, but it appeared that all the tickets purchased for that flight were used, so it does appear that Judy did arrive in Philadelphia that night. Then on September 7th, 1997, a father and son were out deer hunting on a hillside of North Carolina's Mount Pisgah National Forest. They were shocked to find human bones near Stony Fork picnic area, just a little over 30 miles from Asheville, North Carolina. Some of the bones had been scattered by animals. What remained in the burial site was wrapped in a blue blanket and partially buried. The police were soon notified. As the police were there to inventory the scene, it was reported that there were belongings nearby that appeared to be partially buried as well, but nothing to let them know the identity of the person. The story was reported in the media as police were anxious to find out who their victim was. Dr. Parker Davis at the Angel Medical Center in Franklin, North Carolina, had seen the story about the unidentified person and remembered seeing a flyer about Judy Smith's disappearance. He faxed the article to the Philadelphia PD. They then requested Judy Smith's dental records from Jeffrey Smith. The coroner didn't take long to have an answer. Judy Smith had now been found. There were so many questions at the scene of the remains. Judy had no ID on her, and her red backpack was not there, but her wedding ring was still on her finger. There were expensive Bolé sunglasses at the scene that the family said did not belong to her. She was wearing clothing appropriate for hiking and hiking boots, but her family didn't recognize anything she was wearing. Judy was thought to have taken $200 with her the day she went missing, and $167 of it was found at the scene. There was a blue and black backpack found with winter clothing inside. They also said there appeared to be slash marks on her bra and the bones, so they believed their victim was stabbed and classified it as a homicide. Judy Smith had been murdered. The police started an investigation, and it was reported there were sightings of Judy Smith around Asheville in the days after she had went missing from Philadelphia. Two of the sightings strangely said Judy was driving a gray sedan filled with boxes and bags. One sighting was near the campground near where her remains were found. The woman asked if she could spend the night there in her car. When she was told she could not, she left the area. The other sighting of her in the car was at a deli near the same area, and Judy bought $30 worth of sandwiches and a toy truck. The third sighting seems to be the most credible one. It was at a souvenir shop near Asheville. The worker said Judy seemed pleasant, even saying her name was Judy. She went on to say she was from Boston and had a husband who was an attorney, and he was attending a conference in Philadelphia, and she had just decided to go to the Asheville area. The family was completely baffled as to how and why Judy Smith traveled 600 miles to Asheville. Most of the money she took with her was found with her remains, and none of her credit cards or her phone card had been used. No activity on her bank account as well. Her family could not think of any interest Judy had prior in wanting to visit that area. The only time they could remember her being in that area was when she visited her husband at a weight loss clinic in North Carolina several years earlier. The family said she also might have driven a patient to that area years ago to see their family members, but the family's recollection on that is pretty vague. As for suspects in Judy's murder, there really aren't many. One name that has been mentioned is serial killer Gary Michael Hilton. He did murder an elderly couple 10 years after Judy Smith's murder. The couple was hiking in the Mount Pisgah National Forest, and the female victim, Irene Bryant, body was found only about a mile from where Judy's remains were. It was reported that around this time, Hilton was living in his white Chevy Astro van when he encountered the couple. Although Hilton was known to be in that area in years after Judy's death and was a murderer, there has not been any evidence to link him to her murder. The discovery of Judy's remains seems to have all but exonerated her husband as well. Judy was found deep in the forest on a hillside, and Jeffrey Smith was morbidly obese, so he would not have been physically able to either hike there or bring her remains there. In fact, police seem to think Judy was killed on or near where she was found because even someone in excellent physical shape would have had trouble carrying her body that far in that terrain. So as for my thoughts and theories on this case, I really struggled with this part. In this case, no theory that I can give you makes perfect sense. The case is made up of nothing but whys. First, I'll give you the things I don't think happened. I don't think Judy was there to meet anyone, as has been speculated. It would have been easier for her to just stay in Boston and take a trip to meet someone while her husband was away. I don't think Judy had amnesia, as she told people some accurate information about herself. Initially, I would have said I don't think the sightings of Judy in the car full of boxes and bags near Asheville was her, because it just seemed so crazy as to how she would get a vehicle. But I did notice something that gave me pause. Judy was thought to have left the hotel room the day she went missing with $200. When she was found, $167 was with her. The person at the local deli mentioned that Judy bought $30 worth of sandwiches plus a toy truck. If it was Judy who made those purchases, her total would have been around $33, which would have left her with $167. Just something to think about. I will say I do think Judy went on her adventure willingly. She seemed disoriented at times perhaps, but never fearful. She appeared to be doing exactly what she wanted to do. She was never reported to be seen with anyone. I do think there was some sort of mental issue or confusion at play. It was unlike Judy, such a caring and devoted wife and mother, to be gone indefinitely and not try to get in touch with her family. Perhaps the confusion led Judy to go on a trip and lost track of time and was murdered before she could travel back to Philadelphia to reunite with her husband. Was forgetting her driver's license just an honest mistake, or was it perhaps a symptom of confusion or forgetfulness that she had been having lately? I also wonder if Judy had been mugged and or suffered a blow to her head during her trip. This may explain her apparent confusion, as well as why her signature red backpack and ID wasn't with her remains. As far as her murder, from what her family said, Judy did enjoy hiking. There was also animal hair found on her clothing, and police speculated perhaps Judy visited a nearby horse farm as she had a love of horses. I do think she willingly went on a hike and perhaps encountered someone on the trail who killed her. This person appeared to have a blanket as well as equipment in order to attempt to bury her remains. If they didn't bring all those things way up there on the trail after the fact, perhaps they were camping nearby and already had those things in their possession. There were so many questions in this case. Why didn't she meet Jeffrey that night at the hotel? Why did she go to North Carolina? Why didn't she tell her husband she was going? How did she get the money to purchase different clothes and perhaps a car, if that story is credible? Sadly, more than 27 years later, it is very unlikely we will get any answers in this incredibly strange tragedy. Judy's family was never afforded the closure so often talked about. They were able to have their mother's remains, but the person who took Judy Smith's life has never, and probably will never, be punished for the crime. Unfortunately, Jeffrey Smith passed away in 2005, still haunted at what happened during the last few days of his wife's life. In closing, I want to share a quote that Judy's son Craig said his mother would tell him and his sister that is haunting now given what happened. If you're late or lost, it's not a big deal. Just make sure you call, because not knowing is the worst part. Judy's children never dreamed they would be living that every day. I hope the family can get some form of answer someday, and perhaps clarification on why she left and what she did the last few days of her life. I wanted to talk about another case on today's podcast that is also very bizarre. I posted this as a Lost and Found Chronicles case on my Patreon channel a few months ago, but I wanted to talk about it today as well because of its strong similarities to Judy Smith's case. Tim Molnar was a 19-year-old student who was studying aeronautical mechanics at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Daytona Beach, Florida. He had a loving family consisting of his parents, Michael and Helen, and two siblings, Frank and Michelle, who resided at South Peninsula Drive in Daytona Beach. On Tuesday, January 24th, 1984, he would get in his 1969 Dodge Dart and drop his 14-year-old brother Frank off at his junior high school. However, instead of going on to his class, Tim would drive north, never to return home again. When Tim didn't return that night, his family knew something was wrong. Their son would arrive home at the same time every night like clockwork. They phoned his friends and even alerted police that he hadn't come home that night. Later the same night, his family got 2 phone calls that they believed were long distance. However, there was no voice on the other end of the line, only static. They were unsure if it was a wrong number or perhaps their now missing son trying to reach them. Tim's family was very concerned at this point. About 3 weeks later, they got their first real break in the case. Upon receiving their credit card bill, they learned that on the day of his disappearance, Tim stopped at a gas station in Lake City, Florida, 150 miles north of Daytona Beach, and paid for a tank of gas using his parents' credit card. Tim's mother was able to speak with the attendant that was on duty then, and he did identify Tim as the man he helped that day and said he had been traveling alone. After a frustrating lack of information about their son's whereabouts, the next clue the Molnars would get about Tim would come about 4.5 months after he disappeared. They received a letter from a towing company in Atlanta, Georgia. Apparently, Tim's car was abandoned in a parking lot just 6 days after he vanished, more than 400 miles away from his home. The parking lot just happened to be 1 block away from the Greyhound bus terminal. This clue would be frustrating to the family, however, in how long it took the company to contact them. If they had known much earlier about the abandoned car, they may have been able to get on the trail of their son. The family went to retrieve their son's car. Inside, they found his wallet with no money inside and driver's license, which made the family wonder if Tim had changed his identity. They did notice that some rather expensive items, such as a tool set that Tim kept in his car, a stereo that he had received for Christmas and installed himself, and his bicycle that he kept in his trunk, were all missing from the vehicle. Strangely, Tim did not take any clothes with him from his house when he left that morning. Upon checking, they also discovered that Tim had emptied his savings account of all but $10 right before he left. Another interesting layer to this disappearance would be that a relative of Tim's passed away not long after he disappeared. Tim was in this person's will, and it is estimated that he would stand to inherit about $50,000 from the proceeds. They only needed to do one thing, and that is to let Tim know this, but first they had to find him. Sadly, Tim's case would grow cold for the next several years. Then, in hopes of garnering some leads, the television show Unsolved Mysteries would air a brief segment on his disappearance on November 17, 1995. It would run again on January 31st, 1996. A man named Stephen Cull would be watching that night and would call into the telecenter with an unbelievable story. Stephen said the clothes that it was said Tim left wearing matched the clothes he had found on a body frozen in ice in a secluded lot on a pine plantation in Neosho, Wisconsin, 10 years earlier. There was a key ring full of rusted keys found with the body as well. After he contacted the medical examiner about the possible match, Tim's family was asked to give a DNA sample to the ME, which they did. In November of 1996, the family would get the results. It was a match. 12 years after mysteriously driving away from his home, Tim Molnar had now been found. The keys that Tim had on him were also a match to the keys to the family home, as well as Tim's Dodge Dart that had been left in Atlanta. However, next to nothing about Tim's actual death is known. They could not determine his cause of death, and the body, as far as they could tell, had suffered no trauma. Tim was found more than 1,200 miles away from his home in an isolated area that it wasn't thought he had any reason to be at. These questions still linger 40 years later. There are so many unknowns in this case. We don't know how Tim got to Wisconsin. We don't know why he went there. We don't know when he actually died. We don't even know how he died. He did leave a short trail behind of confusing clues, so let's talk about them. Tim's family seemed to think he could have left home willingly. Had he planned prior to leave that day? He basically emptied his savings account, which may point toward that. However, a few other things that he did or didn't do give me pause. The fact that he brought absolutely no clothes with him. You would also think that he would want his car on his cross-country trip, but he seemingly abandons it, yet takes the key with him. That tells us he didn't sell it for money to use on the trip. I also find it a little strange that if he had emptied his savings account, why would he need to use his parents' credit card for gas? Plus, using a credit card would be an easy way for his family to know his whereabouts. If in fact Tim didn't want his family to know his whereabouts. It appears that he did not, as he never phoned them during his trip to let them know he was okay. Another important detail we don't know is when did Tim actually die. It isn't reported anywhere that I saw of how long the medical examiner thought his body lay there before he was discovered. According to Stephen Cull, he found the remains in 1986, which was 2 years after he left his home. So if the body had only been there briefly before it was discovered, it would mean that Tim Molnar had been alive and well for over a year after he went missing. If that's the case, then perhaps that is the biggest question in a case full of them. What was Tim Molnar doing, and who was he with, if anyone, during the time he is unaccounted for? Now that brings me to a possible new twist in this case. This comes from some posts on Reddit. Of course, it is a board where anyone can pretend to be anyone and say anything they wish, but if the information they mentioned is accurate, it may help fill in some of the holes in this case, but it also might make the case take an even darker turn. This poster talked about a friend of his family. I won't mention the person by name. This family friend spent a lot of time with the poster's aunt and uncle. He would also just show up at the Reddit poster's family's property. They got the feeling he was scoping out the area, which was remote farmland with a long driveway leading up to the house. This person also flew planes and would fly them from Wisconsin to Florida, which of course was where Tim was from. So there is this creepy guy who lived in Wisconsin, would frequently fly to Florida, and would hang out at the poster's aunt and uncle's house, which is less than a mile from where Tim's body was found. In fact, Stephen Call, the man who discovered Tim's remains, lived next door to the aunt and uncle, where the man was a frequent guest. The Reddit poster also says that this unnamed man was later convicted of the sexual assault of a child. He has since moved out of state. The poster states he has reported this information to Milwaukee Homicide, the FBI, and posted it on the internet in several places. I think there's enough there to at least warrant looking into it. Of course, it would be a hard case to prove that Tim Molnar was a victim of foul play, since by the time he was found, he was skeletonized. I'm not really sure exactly what I believe happened in this case. I can't help but compare Tim's case to the tragic case of Gail Delano, also profiled on Unsolved Mysteries, who it was eventually discovered abandoned her car and fled across country and committed suicide in a hotel room under an assumed name. Some similar circumstances match up. Perhaps he emptied most of his savings account to have money for the trip. He didn't want his family to know what he wanted to do, nor did he want them to find him. But where he was found is a little harder to explain. It is obvious that Tim wanted to leave the area, but what we don't know in this case makes it hard to have one clear-cut theory. We don't know if Tim had struggled with his mental health or if he was depressed. We don't know if drugs were a factor at all. I think the biggest question after what caused Tim's death is, did Tim leave the area and even the state to end his life or just to start over? The money he had and the fact that he was found so far away from home may point to starting a new life. However, not getting in touch with his family, bringing no clothing, and leaving his car behind could point to a much sadder scenario. Also, would it have made a difference in his leaving his home to Tim if he had known about the substantial inheritance he was to receive? Unfortunately, we will never know. We will not get the answers we seek in the tragic death of Tim Molnar, for only he knows what he was thinking on that day in 1984 and the circumstances around his death. For years, his family had to live in a horrible state of limbo, but I'm glad they finally were able to find Tim and bring him back home. We have today two people who, for inexplicable reasons, decided to travel to another state and ended up dead. One was a victim of homicide, and the other's end was unclear. It is baffling to think what could have been going on through their minds during that time, and what precipitated their lives ending so tragically on their journey. Were they simply traveling or troubled? That concludes my podcast on Judy Smith and Tim Molnar. If you enjoyed it, please leave me a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. You can find me on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Amazon Music under one word, Lost and Found Podcast. I try to post a new episode every 2 weeks. You can also read all of my articles, as well as links to my most recent podcasts, on my website at Lost and Found Blogs. I also have social media pages under Lost and Found Blogs on Facebook, X, and Instagram. You can reach me via email at lostandfoundpodcast@yahoo. And remember that cold cases stay cold because their story stops getting told.